Hey guys, Liana here. It's Feedback Friday. Do I get a cool vocal effect if I wiggle the mic when I do that? Let's try it. Feedback Friday. I think that probably just made it worse. Anyway, what do you think, Momo? I'm almost purring. Very, very busy week in terms of feedback. Very, very busy. So I'm going to whip through a few things because there's two main things I wanted to get through. And this was the first one, this news on Twitter. I didn't cover it this week because it just happened. But my, Twitter direct message inbox and mentions exploded about this news that Twitter is going to be sharing block lists, and the responses to this were between it's Orwellian to meh. And what are my thoughts? People are asking, what are my thoughts? Well, here are my thoughts, folks. This is just more laziness on the part of Twitter. And the headline, sharing block lists to help make Twitter safer, just shows to me that Twitter doesn't actually understand safety. Like, safer Twitter? You keep using this word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Sharing block lists, which is stuff people do anyway, Twitter's just making it an inherent part of the service. So the status quo is changing practically not at all. But sharing block lists doesn't make Twitter safer. Sharing block lists makes Twitter quieter. And there's a big difference. The bulk of threats from strangers on Twitter are not credible threats, and I say this as someone who gets them. Sometimes they are not even deliberate threats, believe it or not. I had one recently that it turned out the guy was just, I don't know what he was trying to do. He was trying to make some sort of joke, but it was exceptionally badly worded, and it came across as a violent threat. So all's well that ends well on that one. But words, it's a sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me thing. Someone being nasty to me directly on Twitter, it's annoying. And it means I'll end up, tuning out and scrolling through and missing other people's stuff. But it doesn't make me feel endangered, right? Someone being nasty and hating my guts and thinking I'm wrong about anything doesn't make me feel unsafe. The element of Twitter that makes me feel at least professionally unsafe, or in some cases physically unsafe, and I'll get to that in a second, is the rampant ability of people who want to cause trouble to spread defamation on Twitter, and blocking out those voices. Twitter does absolutely nothing to take down defamatory content or exposure of your personal information. All that does is just means you can't see your personal information being spread around. There's a particular individual that uses Twitter to make defamatory statements about me, accuses me of being an abuser in real life, claiming I've harmed her. Actually, it's more than one person. It's up to like 2, 3, or 4 women, all women now, that insist I'm a big bad wolf that somehow hurt them in some mythical alternate reality. But some of them go as far to place personal information about, for instance, the contents of my home on external websites that they link people to through Twitter. And, when someone is posting personal information about you, to me, that is more, and some of this stuff was, for the record, covered by an NDA she signed, but this is the joy about NDAs. What do you do when someone breaks them? You go to court and you sue them when the person has no money? No, it's a waste of your time. There's nothing you can do. If someone, the most powerful tool in business is a handshake, for me. And if someone shakes your hand, you expect them to honor their word. When they don't honor your word, you don't do business with them anymore. If they steal from you and, make millions of dollars with it, well, then you sue them. But if somebody breaks an NDA, there's really nothing you can do. And so in one case, somebody broke an NDA and spread stuff all over Reddit, all over Twitter. What does sharing a block list do with that, Twitter? What does sharing a block list do for your personal responsibility for allowing people through your service to spread defamation and other harmful material. Blocking them doesn't stop them from doing that. All it means is you can't see it, so you can't respond, and you can't control it. Useless. It doesn't make you more safe. This makes you less safe. So my advice to someone who is dealing with things on Twitter that make them feel unsafe, and it does happen. It does happen. But blocking's what you do when someone's annoying. If you actually feel unsafe, there's other things that need to be done. And Twitter is useless about doing anything about getting dangerous material like home addresses, phone numbers, malicious photos, things like that. Useless at getting that stuff taken down in a timely manner. So as far as I'm concerned, nothing's changed. Same old status quo. Yay, Twitter. Good job doing nothing. So the next thing I want to move on to, yay, I did that in 6 minutes. Go me. Next thing I want to move on is the overwhelming amount of feedback I got to my toxic masculinity video. And the number one question I was asked is, well, you talked about toxic masculinity. What about toxic femininity? And some of these questions were snarky, but some of them were actually quite sincere. People wanting to know. Awesome. Yes, there are toxic elements to femininity. And yes, people do talk about them. And what I'm going to do today is show you proof that this stuff is being talked about in feminist circles. And it has been talked about in feminist circles for quite some time. Okay, ready? Here we go. The first one that most people know about is a book called Queen Bees and Wannabes. You may recognize the name Rosalind Wiseman. She's decided to step into the, tech and video game and social networking spheres. I've read this book. It's far, far, far from one of my favorites on the subject. It's relevant because it was the inspiration for the movie Mean Girls. Now, what this book does is it's supposed to help parents understand the realities of being a modern teenage girl, because the toxic outcomes or the toxic effects of certain things associated with, as she calls it, girl world, start manifesting at around the age of when the book was first written, it was starting at the age of 12, 13 years old. Now, in the updated version, it's starting as young as 8, 9, and 10 years old. And it's the toxic byproducts of the indirect, inauthentic world of social capital that women are forced into, young women, well, girls. When somebody's 8, they're a girl, but they're forced into this social capital paradigm, among other things, and it becomes very literally toxic. She talks about things like sleepovers where, girls are all there, they pick a target and they text them and they respond, and 6 of them are, huddled around a cell phone at a sleepover, mocking and making fun of this person who, has no idea they have an audience. And that comes from the, idea that popularity equals power, that popularity equals validation as female. It's sort of a complicated thing. My issue with Queen Bees and Wannabes is, Wiseman identifies the problem very, very well. I find her solutions for parents, her tips for parents, attempt to avoid the problem instead of teaching your daughter to cope with the problem. And I think learning how to be an authentic person is so much more important in terms of skills that will transfer into, adulthood and the business world, and, into that whole lean in sphere that Sheryl Sandberg talks about. And that could be another idea, another thing connected to toxic femininity, the idea that women don't ask for stuff is sort of what lean in's about. I should have pulled that one up, but I didn't. I was focusing on, when it starts, the more obvious things. The book I prefer on this subject to Queen Bees and Wannabes is a book called Odd Girl Out by Rachel Simmons. I really like Rachel Simmons as an author because she encourages girls groups and communities to solve their problems for themselves. This is an absolutely great book about female bullying. And she talks about how female bullying is exceptionally distinct from the bullying that we used to know about. And she really talks about the lack of authenticity and how showing confidence is seen as something as a negative thing. Women are branded for being stuck up or bitchy, or, she thinks she's all that, is what Rachel Simmons talks about. And since this book was written, since I first read it, I've seen it sort of come along to this interesting thing that there's this forced false confidence in girls now, where they go out of their way to sort of Kardashian the all that factor. Wow, these are all just jargon terms, but like pop culture jargon. But it's sort of come the other way. It's the same underlying principle that if people find you confident, they're gonna try to tear you down, and probably succeed, because it's much easier to tear someone down than to build them up. And so they they take on this reality TV approach. I don't care if people hate me. I'm doing my thing, and haters gonna hate and all that stuff. But the reality is they're still being controlled by other people's perceptions of them. I mean, the Kardashian family is all about selling the products and the clothes and the hair, and they're obsessed with their public image. So I really, really like this book. But this stuff sort of deals with the results of sort of the toxic influences of feminine stereotypes, and the holes that we try to force women into. My favorite book of all time about the actual internal conflicts this caused is a book called Reviving Ophelia. It's a bit old now. They updated it in I think they updated it. Was this really written in 2005? I thought it was older than that. But this is a glorious, glorious book called Reviving Ophelia, Saving the Selves of Adolescent Girls. And the techniques it has in the book, they're real simple. But the techniques that they use to overcome what they call a developmental Bermuda Triangle. And, the author, Mary Piper, who's a therapist, was seeing all these, adolescent girls streaming into therapy because of depression, eating disorders, suicide attempts, and crushingly low self-esteem. This is the, the world of toxic femininity. And coming of age in a media-saturated culture preoccupied with, here it is, unrealistic ideals of beauty and images of dehumanized sex, a culture rife with addictions and sexually transmitted diseases. They were losing their resiliency and optimism in a girl-poisoning culture that propagated values at odds with those necessary to survive. Girl-poisoning culture comes as close to actually saying toxic femininity as you can possibly get. So for all those anti-feminists out there that claim that feminism does not concern itself with toxic femininity, proof positive, guys and girls. Guys is a gender neutral term to me. I don't mean men when I say guys. But proof positive right there that feminism concerns itself with girl poisoning culture. Right there. And there are a lot of other books on this subject, but I like this one because she uses one-on-one case studies and actually gets to the root causes of what causes some of this. Everybody uses buzzwords like low self-esteem and, stuff like eating disorders. I mean, eating disorders is the, I think the biggest outward symptom of toxic femininity. It's kind of sad that we're seeing the rates of men who have eating disorders or boys that have eating disorders increasing as, the toxic effects of socially determined masculinity increase as well. Masculinity and appearance are becoming linked in a different way than they were before. And so you're seeing a rising amount of men who have eating disorders. Now, you'll note, because I know some people are probably freaking out because of the suicide attempts thing. And men's rights activists and the like say, but men commit suicide more often. Yes. Yes, it's true. Yes. Men die by suicide at a far larger far greater, that's what I'm looking for, rate than women do. Women attempt suicide more often. And some people callously say, well, it's just a cry for help. The thing about this whole cry for help thing is that when you have to physically harm yourself in one way or another to get the help you need, instead of being able to ask for help because you're dismissed as dramatic or over emotional or fragile, that is a problem. And that is the toxic feminine phenomenon that leads to these suicide attempts. Now, men, why do men, I hate using the term succeed at suicide. It's been suggested to me by suicide prevention advocates that we say died by suicide instead of successful suicide attempt, because successful suicide attempt just sounds terrible. And it's, let's call it what it is. Somebody killed themselves. But, success or failure in this paradigm is wacky. So we'll say died by suicide. Why do men die by suicide more often? In part because it's the method they choose to attempt suicide. The other thing is that, it's this how we communicate, and this is where we get into the toxic femininity and toxic masculinity. It can fall off. It can become disordered in ways that are different for men than women, and the underlying issues that have to be done, that have to be addressed, are different. I mean, men, the line that stuck with me is that men say, even the women of their lives would rather they die on their white horse than have a moment of weakness. That's the toxic masculinity paradigm that we work in when it comes to suicide. When we deal with female suicide attempts, the inner workings, the way things are put together are different. Hello, Momo. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, we have to pick one. We don't have to pick one. Because there are people working on, the gender-related reality that men are mocked when they ask for help. Well, women are dismissed when they ask for help in different ways. I mean, men are, suck it up, what are you, sissy? Whereas women are, oh, stop being so dramatic, stop being a complainer, don't be negative. Isn't it the same result? It's the same result. And, sometimes it's just a question of somebody decided to take a bunch of pills, which means there was time to get them to the hospital and save their life, as opposed to, a more immediate, like shooting themselves or something like that there's no time to save somebody when they do that. And that's part of the difference. They're very complex issues. Experts do have things that do work, but this false binary on this issue of self-esteem, depression, suicide prevention, there are a lot of false binaries going on based on gender. And the reality is that how do I put this? The place that you have to get to in both men and women are relatively the same. the things keeping you from getting there between men and women can be different. You know, the biggest issue with women is that, you know, aggression and directness and ambition are considered male characteristics, except when it comes to chasing boys. So, you know, aggression has become synonymous with sexuality in a lot of people's minds, and that's perverse. And, you know, this causes issues because what happens when a woman wants to be career oriented? Well, there's all these pejoratives that are attached to it because it's seen as unnatural. And this is where we get into the, you know, humans are social beings. When people don't fit in, when they are rejected, especially if they're rejected for something that's very authentic about themselves, there's issues. There's a psychological cost. And, you know, we have boy poisoning culture for sure. You know, I mean, I grew up in a time where it was, if somebody hits you, hit them back. Well, you can't really do that anymore, can you? So, you know, boys are trapped. And one of the things that's interesting in Simmons' work is she actually talks about the fact that what she calls alternate aggression or relational aggression in teen girls, we're starting to see that more and more and more in men and boys, the back talking, the gossiping, the secret keeping, the alliance building. Stop it, phone. Okay, that means I'm going to wrap it up. But we're seeing it more in boys because that punch in the face to solve the problem has such dire consequences now. And I'm not saying that fighting is better. I'm saying that instead of going from, you know, an unhealthy way of solving problems to a healthy way of solving problems, boys have just had their issues transferred from one unhealthy form of problem solving associated with the masculine sphere and jump to an unhealthy form of problem solving associated with the feminine sphere. But it's no more healthy, which says that we're not teaching kids of either gender to be their authentic selves. And I think my crazy crackpot theory is that we're too focused on what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and what men want and what women want and what men like and what women like and rites of passage for men and rites of passage for women. And they've shown that rites of passage have an importance, but there's no need for them to be tied to gender. What I'm getting at here is that we're so obsessed with masculinity and femininity is we're losing our connection with personhood and individuality. And the funny thing is that Western society, modern Western civilization, was built on an increased concept of individual over collective. And it seems that for some reason or another, well, I mean, through the Enlightenment and all that, I mean, individuality was becoming a big deal in the Enlightenment. And then we hit industrialization, where, you know, factory workers and the company and the multinational corporation and all that started rising up. It's almost that corporate branding and corporate personhood has interrupted the idea of personhood. And I'm crossing the streams a little bit. I'm talking about economic models and you know, business stuff in the realm of gender. But these individual bits of identity, these facets of a person, come into conflict because, you know, the expectations of business are very they're very fixed on one way of doing things, that aggressive, competitive, combative, you know, it gets into the backstabbing, win at all costs kind of thing. These are seen as masculine, but they're really not masculine traits. They're just more encouraged. Competitiveness as opposed to cooperation has traditionally been more emphasized in boys than girls. You know, if you think about how traditionally men and women have played, it's been, you know, competitive sports. Yes, team sports, but competitive team sports for boys, and then more go out and be friends for girl activities. And I don't know really what they are completely, because I tended to play with boys. That was my socialization. I played baseball and basketball, and the one thing I did play with girls was double dutch, the skip rope, because that stuff's intense, man. And there's a little bit of competitiveness. You try to up the number and the speed with other people. But I was also very lucky, very fortunate. And Simmons talks about this in her books. I was very fortunate to grow up in a neighborhood where there were a great many immigrant families and people of color that were my peers in school. And what Simmons dealt with in her book, and I've read in other places, is that because the concept of masculine and feminine are somewhat different between, from one culture to the next, that they weren't finding the same sort of toxic femininity when Simmons did her research, and she focused on 8th graders in a particular part of the US. So this is I can't say for sure across the board, but she found that, say, Latina girls were less likely to have some of the toxic feminine influences because they were more encouraged to speak their mind. Now, I've read things that have said that subsequent to that original research, those numbers are dropping as assimilation happens and as things are streamlining. So that implies, and I think someone would have to test this, that a multicultural environment would actually offset some of the most radical influences of, the toxic feminine and the toxic masculine, just because you don't get as rigid social norms when the social norms are different within the community. When you're very multicultural, you're constantly questioning more what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a person of faith, etc., etc. And I mean, the example in my school that, again, I almost said I feel very privileged to have grown up in such a multicultural thing. And that's kind of funny because some people would take that the wrong way. But it was really awesome to go to school. And in my school, there'd be, someone there who was from Pakistan or Iran, or there was some people from Afghanistan when I went to school. A lot of people from Asia, Vietnam, Korea. There were people from Singapore, but there were also people from the Caribbean islands. And you can imagine, practicing Muslims wearing the hijab in the same class as people who were, back then we called it skank dancing. Now it's called twerking. But this would be something, to tell somebody now that we did a twerking class in high school, people would be horrified. But before there was this cultural association with, Miley Cyrus and company, twerking was just, a form of, it was dance hall dancing. And it's all over the Caribbean, and they have competitions and all that stuff. It doesn't have the same... it has the same meaning. Yes, the gestures are simulating sex acts, but that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing cultural to culture. The metaphor has a slightly different shift. And that was an amazing thing. It was a defining thing for me to experience so many types of boys and so many types of girls growing up and seeing how different it is. And I think that's part of the reason I've been able to sort of resist some of the pressures that keep people from success based on, gendered assumptions and all that stuff. And so hopefully this gives you guys a bit of background, and we can start to end this false dichotomy of toxic masculinity. What about toxic femininity? Or, well, it's worse for us, or it's worse for us. No, it's not better or worse. There's nothing terribly unique about the criticisms of gender across gender lines. People are studying all of it. Trust me. So now, before you get defensive, the next time people are, what about toxic femininity? Well, here you go. Girl poisoning culture. Right there. I didn't write this. Look it up. Look up the Amazon.com thing. It's right there, guys. Okay, happy Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone. And remember, less toxicity. Unless, you're going out and doing tequila shooters, which, in that case, go for it.